Okay, so I apologize up front if the audio quality is bad in this video. I'm on limited time, as you can see from my upload schedule. I've not been doing much with YouTube lately, and so I've got to get this video done today, and my external mic is bad, so I'm recording this with the internal mic on this camera. So there have been a few cameras that have come out since the release of this camera that have overshadowed this camera, and I think that's why you can get such a good deal on this camera now. You can buy this brand new for just under 240 bucks, and that's directly through Insta360. And I think if you shop around or buy used, you might even be able to get a much better deal than that. So when it comes down to it, I'm not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't buy. I really just kind of want to give you the most information that I can give you and let you know what's worked out for me. And hopefully you can use that information to come to your own conclusion as to what works for you and what is within your budget. So I travel a lot, and this has become my go-to grab-and-go camera. And the reason that I like it so much is just because it's just easy to use. I pretty much point it at what I want to point it at. It gets the image, and I like the image quality that comes out of it. I don't have to do any color grading. I record on the vivid profile, which it does give it a bit of a oversaturated and kind of that over sharpened action cam look, but I don't mind the look that comes out of this camera at all. Actually, I'm really kind of partial to it. So yeah, like I said, it's something that I just really like to use because of the time that it saves me in editing. Now, like I said, this is my travel camera, and what I really like about using this as a travel camera, is that it is easy to use. I can point it at what I want to get the picture of, record, and I don't have to fiddle around with camera settings and things like that on my vacation. It's just easy. I want to kind of spend my time in the moment, enjoying the moment, and not worry about messing around with a camera. The image quality for me in 4K vivid 30 FPS is plenty fine. I'm not trying to make any Hollywood production movies. I'm not trying to like win any Oscars, and I think that the absence of needing to do any kind of color grading in post is completely worth it. As you can see, we're dealing with a scene here that is cold, dead, gray, winter Ohio weather. So this is really kind of like the worst case scenario for using this camera. If you take this someplace super sunny and super bright, you're going to get a lot better image out of it, especially with the vivid profile. But I wanted to show you a contrast between both kinds of images that you're going to get, say, using this in cold gray Ohio in the wintertime versus something like the Nevada desert in the summertime. This camera definitely favors bright lights and vivid colors. Another really fantastic thing that I love about this camera is the stabilization. I've got the stabilization set on low right now, and I'm just walking as normal, and I think I'm getting a pretty stable shot out of this. Now, when you do use stabilization, you get a little bit of a delay between what you're recording and what you're seeing on the screen, but I think the screen is small enough that it's really just kind of for framing purposes anyway. This camera is a fixed focus camera, so what you're going to see off in the distance is going to be more in focus than something that's up close. And to be honest with you, I'm probably too close to this camera right now to get adequate focusing out of it. I'm going to extend my stick and extend my arm, and I'm probably more in focus right now, but I'm not a vlogger. I don't use this for vlogging, so to me it's not that big of a deal. But if I shoot it off, say, that way, everything is going to be more in focus. So after having this camera for a while, a few accessories that I got to kind of make my life a little bit easier. I got a mic adapter, which ironically I'm not using today because, like a dummy, I forgot to charge my external mic. I got a cold shoe adapter for the top, and I got a battery handle from Ulanzi, which I can plug this into and record all day with it. It is really, I think, a lot better than buying additional batteries for this camera. Which brings me to one of the things that I actually don't like about the camera is the modular design. Um, it's one of those things that it seems like a good idea on paper, but in practice, you kind of fiddle around with taking the camera apart and putting it back together, and that's just not something that I found in my workflow that I really wanted to do. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, the battery life on this camera is not bad if you don't go with any kind of external batteries or additional batteries. I can get about an hour and 20 minutes off of one battery recording in 4K 30 FPS on this camera. This camera also shoots in active HDR mode. It's something that I almost never use. Like I said, I almost always set this camera in 4K 30 in vivid mode and just point and shoot and let it go from there, and it usually gives me a pretty good image. Normally I will just set the white balance because if you do forget to set the white balance and there's a drastic change in color, you will see it as the camera tries to adjust. But for the most part, I just shoot in 4K vivid and leave it at that. So now let me talk about a couple of the downsides that you should be aware of if you buy this camera. And the major thing that was such a hassle for me was app activation. So with most tech these days, you've got to tie it to some app on your phone and activate it before you can use it. And that was the case with this camera. That's not such a big deal because, like I said, I kind of expect it with most tech these days. It's just kind of the way that everything is going. The downside is that you can't download the Insta360 app and install it on every phone out there. You have to have kind of a hefty phone to be able to install the app. And if you can't install the app on your phone, like if your phone is not compatible, you can't even like side load it from a third party and install it. It just won't work. And if you can't install that app, you can't activate this camera. At the time that I got this camera, I kind of had a not a flagship phone, and I was not able to install the Insta360 app. So I actually had a friend activate this camera for me on his iPhone, which at that point I was able to use the camera, but man, what a hassle it was. And after that, I went out and bought my own phone that would work with this stuff, but again, what a hassle. So another thing with this camera that is kind of a disadvantage, but at the same time a little bit of an advantage, is that it records in like these compressed files. So whatever you record is going to save a lot of space on your SD card, but it's not ready to just pull off the camera and use right away. You've got to run it through. I use Insta360 Studio. You can do it on the phone app, but I use the PC version of Insta360 Studio. And what I do is when I go out and record a bunch of clips, I come home, I throw everything in the Insta360 Studio app and run everything through that, and then I go to bed, and the next morning all of my files are ready to go for me. But if you want to have a camera where you go out and record, come in, throw everything in the computer, and you're ready to edit right away, doesn't work that way. Now you can record in a pro mode on this, but I don't use it, so that may alleviate some of that, but it's just something to be aware of. Another downside is that this camera does have a action cam sensor in it, a standard like 1/2.3 inch action cam sensor, so it does fall apart in low light. All the beauty of the stabilization that you get from this camera falls apart in low light. The footage becomes grainy in low light. It's something to be aware of because it's not really so much a downside of the camera, it's a downside of it having such a small sensor. And you're going to get the same kind of performance out of pretty much any other action camera with the same size sensor, be it GoPro or DJI or a generic action cam. That's a limitation of the small sensors, so it is what it is. It's just something that you're going to have to decide whether or not you can deal with that limitation. Okay, so why would you want to buy this camera instead of some newer action camera offerings that are out there? And I think it comes down to price, and if you're able to work around some of the limitations of this camera and settle for what it does, I think you've got a pretty good set of options with this camera at its price point. Now I say at its price point based on if you just buy the 4K mod. So as I mentioned before, this camera is available at $239 as opposed to, say, the new Ace Pro, which is $450, or the Insta360 Go 3, which I think is around $400. But you get a different kind of shooting options with both of those cameras. Now, I would say for vlogging, this camera is superior to the Go 3 if vlogging is your thing. The Go 3 does not have any kind of external mic input ability, whereas this camera, you can get a mic adapter and run a mic into this, even though I'm not doing that now because I are dumb. But it's something to keep in mind. Also, what I'm talking about here is if you buy the 4K edition instead of the Twin edition. The Twin edition comes with the 360 lens mod, but if you never use any kind of 360 video, then it's something to consider for a massive amount of savings. I really thought that the 360 mod was pretty cool, and I still do use it from time to time, but when it comes down to it, I use the 4K mod on this camera a lot more than I do the 360 mod. Really, it all comes down to how heavy your pocketbook is at the end of the day. So that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything else to say about this camera. As far as should you buy it, I'm going to leave that up to you. I just hope I've given you enough information to come to that decision whether or not you should get this or something else. Anyway, thanks for watching. That's it for now, and I'll see you next time.